Have you ever wondered why some miracles seem to take so long to arrive, even when you have faith? Why, if God already promised it, hasn't it happened yet? Many pray, many believe, many praise, yet the miracle doesn't manifest. Today, I want to invite you to discover a spiritual key we often ignore: obedience. Yes, obedience. Because, according to the scriptures, there isn't a single miracle recorded in the Bible that wasn't preceded by a divine instruction, followed by obedience from the man or woman who received it. The atmosphere for miracles is activated not only by faith, worship, or praise, but also by obedient action to what God says. The Bible reveals a repeating formula. Instruction leads to obedience, which leads to miracle. This is the invisible structure behind many supernatural acts. God gives a word, a command, a specific indication. Then the human being responds with obedience, and consequently, heaven manifests with power. But if the instruction isn't obeyed, the miracle is halted. Many believe that prayer is enough, that with faith the miracle will manifest. But faith without obedience is incomplete. It's not enough to know what God said. You must act according to what He said. Take the example of Joshua and the walls of Jericho. In Joshua chapter 6, God had already declared victory. He told Joshua, "I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men." It was already done in the spiritual realm, but even so, God gave specific instructions. They were to march once a day for 6 days, and on the 7th day, march 7 times, sound trumpets, shout, and then the walls would fall. Why give such detailed instructions if He had already declared victory? Because the miracle would not happen without obedience. The people of Israel could have reasoned, "What's the point of walking in circles around a wall?" But they didn't reason. They obeyed. And for 7 days they repeated the steps, and in the end, the walls fell. Obedience was the prelude to the miracle. Another powerful example is found with Moses at the Red Sea. The people of Israel were fleeing Egypt and found themselves trapped between the sea and the enemy army. There was an obstacle that was humanly impossible to overcome. God gave Moses an instruction: raise your staff over the sea. He didn't say, "Wait for me to open it first." The sea didn't open because of the people's distress or their cries. It opened when Moses obeyed. When he lifted the staff, the miracle occurred. Imagine if Moses had remained paralyzed, waiting for God to act without obeying. The sea would never have opened. How many times have you received a word, a promise, a vision, and nothing has happened? Perhaps the promise hasn't been fulfilled because you haven't yet obeyed the instruction that precedes it. You know, God isn't waiting for you to ask Him for more. He's actually waiting for you to obey. There are doors that open not with physical keys and, honestly, not even with words, but with steps of obedience. God isn't limited by time or resources, but He does honor a spiritual principle. He Himself established obedience. In Peter's story, after working all night without catching anything, Jesus gave him a direct instruction: put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. At first glance, it would seem like a waste of time. Peter, an expert fisherman, knew that wasn't the right time. He knew he had already tried everything, but he responded with something more powerful than his experience. He obeyed. and that obedience activated the miracle. The empty sea suddenly filled with fish. The net was breaking from the quantity. What he couldn't achieve with a whole night of human effort, he achieved in seconds through obedience to a single word from the Lord. This story isn't about a new fishing technique or a favorable weather change. It's about one thing: a divine instruction followed by illogical obedience. The supernatural isn't reasoned with, it's obeyed. And just like Peter, many others in the scriptures saw God's power unleashed when they obeyed, even without understanding. When Jesus encountered the paralytic at Bethesda, he didn't ask if he had faith. He didn't demand a sacrifice. He simply gave him a command. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. That man had been paralyzed for 38 years. He no longer expected anything. He no longer had the strength to move by himself. But when he heard Jesus' voice, something inside him responded. He didn't reason. He didn't argue. He didn't question. He simply obeyed. And instantly, his body was restored. He got up, picked up his mat, and began to walk. There's a revealing detail in this story. Jesus told him to pick up his mat. That mat was a symbol of his past, his limitation, his illness. He no longer needed it, but the instruction was clear. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Because, total obedience seals the miracle. And often, God asks us to carry the memory of what we were to bear witness to what he has done. Later, we find the man born blind. Jesus made mud with his saliva, put it on the man's eyes, and told him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." He didn't promise sight. He didn't explain why. He just said, "Go and wash." And he went, with his eyes covered in mud, without vision, without a guide, just with a word. He washed, and he came back, seeing. How many times does God give us simple instructions that seem to make no sense, that defy our reason, that go against our logic, but the miracle is on the other side of that obedience? The blind man could have waited for an immediate healing. He could have thought it made no sense to walk around with mud in his eyes, but he chose to obey. In each of these cases, the pattern is the same: instruction, obedience, miracle. Nothing moves until man responds with active faith, because, true faith isn't passive. Faith is expressed with steps, with action, with obedience, and it's in that obedience that the supernatural is activated. There are promises that are already decreed. There are blessings that have already been spoken from heaven, but they haven't yet descended because obedience is lacking. God doesn't delay his hand. Often, it is we who hold back the miracle by not moving when he tells us, "Go, get up, cast it, touch, speak, walk." Heaven doesn't respond to logic, it responds to obedience. Therefore, what seems small, foolish, or insignificant in our eyes may be the exact act God is waiting for to release his power. What if the instruction you've been ignoring is the key that unlocks the door to the miracle you've been waiting for? Obeying without reasoning. That is the mark of those who walk by faith, because, you don't need to understand to obey. You only need to trust. God has already spoken. He's just waiting for you to take the step. When God speaks, His words are not suggestions, they are instructions laden with purpose. Every divine command, no matter how simple or strange it may seem, contains within it the power to release the supernatural. What man sees as a meaningless act, God sees as the sign that activates His movement on earth. And once again, the key is to obey. At the wedding in Cana, the wine ran out. A social event that should have been a source of joy was about to turn into shame for the hosts. Mary, Jesus' mother, understood something many forget. When the human runs out, the divine begins. And it was there that Jesus gave an unexpected instruction. Fill the jars with water and take them to the master of the banquet. He didn't tell them the water would turn into wine. He didn't promise anything would happen. He just gave a command. And even though it made no sense to use purification jars, even though there was no apparent relationship between water and wine, the servants obeyed. They filled the jars, took the sample to the attendant, and the miracle occurred. The water was transformed. The wine appeared, and not just any wine, but the best. The miracle happened on the path of obedience. If anyone had doubted, if anyone had hesitated, if they had tasted the content before delivering it, if they had reasoned, the miracle would have stopped. But they didn't reason. They just did what He said, and the result was supernatural. Another powerful example is the multiplication of the loaves. A hungry crowd, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus didn't pray for more to appear. He didn't make food fall from the sky. He gave an instruction. Have the people sit down in groups. You give them something to eat. He took the loaves, blessed them, broke them, and gave them back to the disciples exactly as they were. You know, the miracle didn't happen in Jesus' hands. It happened in the hands of those who obeyed. As they broke, distributed, and just kept giving, the bread didn't run out. The fish, well, it kept appearing. And in the end, not only did everyone eat, but there were 12 baskets full left over. Because, honestly, the miracle doesn't stop at provision. The miracle always leaves evidence. God doesn't need quantity. He doesn't need human resources. He only needs obedience. Sometimes we believe that obeying is easy when we have abundance, but true obedience is really tested when we have to give the last thing we have. Like the widow from whom Elijah asked for her only meal. She only had a little flour and oil. She planned to cook it and die. But the prophet told her, "First make a small cake for me." She obeyed. And from that act, the flour did not run out, and the oil did not fail throughout the drought. You know, God doesn't ask to leave you with nothing. He asks to multiply. He asks to test your heart. He asks to unleash what He has already decreed. And, well, it doesn't only manifest in provision, also in healing and deliverance. That man with leprosy came seeking his miracle, but the instruction wasn't as glorious as he expected. There was no laying on of hands, no oil, no altar. The prophet didn't even come out to see him. He simply told him, "Go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River." The Jordan was a dirty river. Naaman, a powerful general, felt it was humiliating. He thought about turning back. Weren't there cleaner rivers in his country? Why in that river? Why so many times? Because the miracle isn't in the water, but in the obedience. And when he decided to obey without understanding, to immerse himself without complaining, something happened. On the seventh time, his flesh was restored like that of a child. The leprosy disappeared. God's honor was manifested. Behind every miracle, there is an instruction, and behind every instruction, there is a decision. Obey without reasoning. Do without asking. Act without conditions. What seems illogical today may be the exact step God is waiting for. What seems insignificant today may be the seed of the miracle you are seeking. God isn't impressed by our strength or our sacrifice. God is pleased with the heart that obeys, and in that obedience, He is glorified. You know, there are times when God isn't looking for our strength, our reasoning, or even our ability. All He is looking for is a heart that says, "Yes, Lord," because when we obey what He has already said, we actually unleash what is already ready to manifest. On one occasion, Jesus encountered 10 men with leprosy who begged Him to cleanse them. He didn't make a public prayer. He didn't touch them. He didn't declare a word over them. He simply gave them a simple instruction: "Go and show yourselves to the priests." That was all. A command, without an explicit promise. A walk without guarantees. But they obeyed. And as they were on their way, the leprosy began to disappear. The miracle didn't happen when they asked for it, not even when they heard it. The miracle was activated while they were obeying. Only one returned to give glory. The others continued on their way, maybe surprised, maybe in silence. But what really matters is this divine pattern that repeats itself again and again. Instruction, obedience, miracle. And even today, this principle hasn't changed. In so many homes, there are people waiting for divine intervention, families waiting for restoration, children waiting to return, bodies waiting for healing, finances waiting for deliverance. But, you know, heaven seems stopped. Not for lack of power, not for lack of love, but because the instruction was given, but it has not yet been obeyed. The faith that pleases God is not just the one that believes. It's the one that obeys in the midst of uncertainty. It's the faith that acts when it doesn't understand. The one that moves without guarantees. The one that takes the step with closed eyes, trusting that the one who spoke is faithful to fulfill. A woman was healed by touching the hem of Jesus' cloak. No one told her to do it. No one gave her a command, but she obeyed a divine impulse sown by the Spirit in her heart, and her obedience, even without having received an audible instruction, caused power to flow from Christ's body. Because obedience is not only external, it is also internal. It's responding to that soft but firm voice that God places within the soul. And if you look closely at every miracle in the Bible, you will discover that all of them, without exception, have something in common: an instruction, an action, a result. What people see as an instruction, heaven sees as a test, a sign of faith, a response to the divine design. And now, you are facing that same decision. Perhaps you already know what you have to do. Perhaps the Lord has been speaking to you for a long time. He has told you, forgive, go, let go, give, serve, close that door, knock on that door, move, offer, ask for forgiveness, renounce, declare it. But you haven't done it. and the miracle still hasn't arrived, not because God doesn't want to do it, but because He awaits your obedience. Because obedience not only unleashes miracles, it also strengthens faith, purifies the heart, and aligns the soul with the will of heaven. It is the mature response of a believer who no longer walks by emotions, but by conviction. The miracle has already been decreed. Heaven has already prepared it. The power is already available, but that step is missing. That yes, that decision, that act of obedience that changes everything. God won't ask you for anything you can't do. He won't give you impossible instructions, but He will ask you for things that require surrender, humility, and trust. And that's where you'll see what others don't see. Miracles activated by simple gestures, provision where there are no resources, healing where there was only a diagnosis, restoration where there was only ruin, freedom where there was only oppression. All of that awaits on the other side of obedience. It's not the size of the action. It's the heart that obeys, and that is the truth that transforms realities. Obedience precedes the miracle.